biggest things to forget about Proposition 8 is that it wasn't passed by a red state, but was born on the palm-treed, left coast, hippie Hollywood hideaway of California. As a conservative world's favorite geographic whipping post, Salon's David Sirota writes that the state is a signpost for those who foment fear that liberals, progressives, socialists, communists, hippies, and other alleged undesirables want to try to turn America into California. But as home to both Prop 8 and a powerful coalition of those who seek to strike it down, what does California tell us about America? When Prop 8 passed, the state's biggest and historically most liberal counties approved of it. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, in January of 2000, only 39% of so-called liberal Californians supported same-sex marriage. By the time Proposition 8 landed on the ballot, same-sex marriage had gained significant support. 48% of Californians voted in support of marriage equality in the 2008 election. By May of 2012, Californians had an official change of heart. As of last spring, 54% favored same-sex marriage, and support continues to grow. As the Supreme Court debates whether lawmaking must first catch up to social science, Prop 8 seems to have outstayed its welcome on the left coast. The question now becomes, just how far behind is the rest of the country? Let us bring in David Sirota, syndicated newspaper columnist and Salon.com contributor, and Congressman Mark Takano of California. David, I'd like to start with you first because you have a great piece in Salon today talking about California. It is dramatic to me. We talk a lot about the national shift in moods and feelings over marriage equality. But in California, which, as you say, is sort of vilified and celebrated as this haven of liberal values, it is the opinion on gay marriage has changed dramatically in the last decade.
It has changed. It's changed a lot, and I think that's tracked the whole country. Look, California is a state which historically has led the country on a number of things, environmental initiatives. It reflects back where the public opinion is. But look, I used to work, when I worked for Bernie Sanders 10 years ago, and that state, Vermont, became the first state to pass civil unions. It was controversial in a place like Vermont, which is arguably one of the only states that's to the political left of California. So I think when California has changed on an issue like gay marriage, I think it simply reflects that it's one of the states that is changing in terms of public opinion, that it's on the edge, on the leading edge of public opinion. But that's where public opinion obviously is going in the rest of the country, which shows that California isn't really a place, as the conservatives say, that's out of step with America.
Mark Takano, you are a representative from the great state of California. You have come out in your public life, and I know, and I'm sure that was a difficult position to be in. When the Supreme Court talks about national attitudes towards gay marriage, and maybe we just aren't there yet, what do you make of that?
Well, I reject that notion. I want to remind you that not only am I a representative from California, but I'm also a representative from Riverside County, which voted strongly in favor of Proposition 8 4 years ago. You know, I came out long before my election in 2012. It was well known that I was an openly gay candidate, and the people of my district elected me resoundingly last November. And I say if Riverside County can be on the right side of history, so can the Supreme Court.
David, I want to talk to you about this off-ramp that we were talking about in the last block, this idea that the Supreme Court sort of is using this smokescreen of we're just not there yet as a society, as a community. The social science isn't in yet. We don't have a determined sort of set of outcomes as far as whether or not gay marriage is harmful to children and or heterosexual couples. You argue, it seems, that that's just an excuse, that they don't really want to have to come out with a decision on this because, and I want to paraphrase your upcoming article in Salon, they are too big to fail. Some decisions are just too big for the Supreme Court. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think what's disturbing about this is that the court some of the justices seem to be saying that they're afraid of the political fallout if there is a ruling that legalizes gay marriage. We heard that sort of sentiment from a number of justices. And the problem with this is that the justices, that means that they're not necessarily focusing on the constitutionality of the California proposition and of same-sex marriage bans. They're focused on whether their ruling, their overturning those bans on constitutional grounds would have political fallout. The problem with that is that means that the court is in the business of ruling on their perception, their subjective perception of what the political fallout will be, not on the fundamental question that they are supposed to be ruling on, that the justices are employed to rule on, which is whether those bans are constitutional. So essentially what you have are justices who may be saying that same-sex marriage bans, they may be unconstitutional, but because overturning them would be politically divisive, those bans should be too big to fail. And we saw that same precedent when it comes to banks, where prosecutors were saying we're afraid that if we prosecute banks, that there will be economic fallout, that they were saying we're not going to prosecute them because of our perception of fallout. Well, when criminal justice and justice issues in general are decided based on the justice system's perception of fallout, that means they're not deciding those issues impartially based on the law.
And I also think we have to talk about the human element here. We've talked a lot about interracial marriage, and I think it's really striking when you talk about whether or not the country is there on marriage equality. If you look at the polling around interracial marriage around the time that the Supreme Court decided Loving versus Virginia, which of course legalized interracial marriage, it had 20% approval and 73% disapproval. Mark, that is dramatically different from where public opinion is now on gay marriage.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we were in a situation where there's an arc that's bending toward justice. I would say we're on an acceleration curve that's bending toward justice. You know, I'm not only an openly gay member of Congress, but the first openly gay member who is a person of color. My brothers have all married outside of their race. My nephew has married a woman who's outside of the Japanese race. And, you know, 64 years ago in California, that would have been illegal. We had a case in California that decided marriage, interracial marriage, much earlier than the rest of the country. You know, let me say also to this point about where California is. You know, 4 years prior to Prop 8, there was an initiative on the California ballot that didn't change the Constitution. It changed the statute and made a definition of marriage. The vote in California was, I think, in the 60s. Over 60% of Californians voted in that initiative to define marriage between a man and a woman. And 4 years later, that margin whittled down to a little more than 2 percentage points. I believe a similar transformations happened in my own county and certainly in my congressional district. I think, you know, that's I think really strong evidence that not only is there a curve that we're on, it's an acceleration curve that we're on.
I support and endorse the acceleration curve. David Zerota and Congressman Mark Takano, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.